Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio program from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Laura Kabelka in Berlin. This week on the show, Hungary's election. Could JD Vance save Viktor Orban from defeat?
I'm here because of the moral cooperation between our two countries, because what the United States and Hungary together represent under Viktor's leadership and under President Trump's leadership is the defense of Western civilization.
What ripple effects could Hungary's vote have for the rest of Central Europe? Then, could Donald Trump's attacks on Iran bring down NATO? And might the Iran war help resolve the long-lasting conflict in the Caucasus? That's all coming up on Inside Europe. Hungary is very much in the spotlight these days as final preparations are made for Sunday's elections. They could mark an end to Prime Minister Viktor Orban's 16-year rule. At the time of recording, Orban's Fidesz party is still way behind the party of his conservative opponent, Péter Magyar, in several polls. A median poll even suggests the opposition could win a two-thirds majority. But in the days running up to the election, several far-right leaders, including Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Alice Weidel from Germany's AfD, had thrown their weight behind Orban. He was even endorsed by US Vice President JD Vance, who joined a rally in Budapest on Tuesday.
And I stand here today because President Trump and I stand with Europe. We stand for sovereignty, we stand for Hungary, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with the man who has done more to defend those values than anyone else, Viktor Orban.
But could Vance's endorsement save Viktor Orban? That's what I asked DW's Ferenc Gál, who watched the last few turbulent days of campaigning in Hungary.
It is very unlikely, because the polls are really not looking good for Viktor Orban and his party, and the polls have not budged after any high-profile visit of international allies that Viktor Orban has hosted in the past couple of weeks. There was a moment where even Orban seemed to be not entirely certain that he is going to win this victory. And this was the moment where JD Vance said, when asked about if he would cooperate with another Hungarian government, and he said, the US is going to cooperate with whoever wins the election, but that he is certain that Viktor Orban is going to win the election. And in that moment, when he said that, Orban made a little hand gesture, kind of waving his hand, indicating that he does not seem to be sure about that. And maybe that is as telling as many of the poll numbers that we're seeing these days.
Did Vance say anything that surprised you?
JD Vance said a lot of things that we've heard from him. He really slammed the EU for interfering in national politics. He criticized the supposed gender ideology. So he really went through a lot of right-wing talking points, which is not surprising if you've heard anything that he said before. But it is surprising in a way that it happens this openly in a European Union country this shortly before an election. And really a lot of things that were said there are just not factually true. But it is just this basic narrative of right-wing politicians that the EU is something evil is just something that both Orban and JD Vance really like to emphasize it.
So Vance and Orban were speaking side by side at this rally in Budapest. You were there. What was that like?
It was interesting. So it was two separate events. The first one was a rather formal press conference at the Carmelite Monastery in Budapest, where the Prime Minister has his official offices. There was a ceremonial guard. Dr. Pepper was served for everyone there. And then the second part was a big rally at a sports arena where a few thousand Fidesz supporters gathered. And that was really, it reminded me of these American rallies where you have a big dark arena, you have lights, you have loud music, you have a stage in the middle where politicians come out and talk and they are being celebrated by the crowds. And you could see that Fidesz really wanted to give this impression of being close to the people, being popular, having no issue whatsoever, filling up a stadium. At the same time, though, there were news reports that even the day before the event itself, Fidesz was still trying to recruit people. The interest in this event might not have been as big as they hoped for.
Is there anything that we may have missed completely about the campaigns, about this event, the last weeks?
What I think is sometimes hard to see from the outside, and even for me, who does not live here in Hungary but has friends and family here, is just the level of polarization that politics has brought into all aspects of society and personal interactions. And then the other thing is just the style of political campaigning. Politicians like Ursula von der Leyen or Volodymyr Zelensky are just on posters everywhere in the country because they are being made out to be enemies of Hungary by the Fidesz party. And I think they show perfectly just the level of aggressiveness and hostility that political campaigning is conducted with here in Hungary.
It's elections, it's an illiberal democracy, but that still implies democracy. Are these elections free?
NGOs and observers say that they're free, but they're not fair. Once people cast their vote, those votes will likely count in the way that they're cast. But what happens before the voting, the means that parties have at their disposal to campaign, the way that certain electoral districts have been redrawn over the past years that favor Fidesz, but also there have been so many reports and allegations and accusations of influencing voters, especially marginalized groups and vulnerable groups. People are being approached and either offered money or sometimes also being threatened to vote. Often this is, of course, hard to prove, but there have been way too many reports to ignore this. So this, of course, is also something that should not be happening in any democracy.
What about the opponent? Would his victory be in the interest of Europe?
Péter Magyar has certainly signaled a willingness to be more cooperative internationally. He has said he wants to strengthen Hungary's position in NATO and in the EU. He wants to be clear about condemning Russia as the aggressor in the Ukraine war. But he has also said that he is skeptical about a fast-track procedure for Ukraine to join the EU, and that he wants to pursue pragmatic external relations also with respect to Russia. So no one should be expecting a complete U-turn when it comes to foreign policy. But I think it's not an exaggeration to say that most politicians and most leaders in the EU would be relieved if he comes into power.
Ferenc Gál, DW's Europe correspondent, speaking to me from Budapest. It's now plausible that the entire edifice of Orban's self-styled illiberal democracy could soon come tumbling down, although some think he has hardwired the country's institutions to make that impossible. Either way, the election will have far-reaching ramifications across Central Europe, as Rob Cameron reports from neighboring Prague.
Viktor Orban seems nervous. This was the scene at a recent rally in opposition stronghold Győr, when he responded to heckling from opponents with a tirade against those who wanted a pro-Ukrainian government to take power in Hungary, he said, and send Hungarian money to Ukraine. In the last few days before the election, allegations are swirling of Kremlin interference, fake assassination plots, burner phones to call Moscow during EU summits, all of which the Orban government denies. Viktor Orban may seem on the ropes, but some analysts argue he spent years engineering a political system that is unusually resistant to change, from a redesigned electoral map that favours his party to a media landscape now largely aligned with the government. Taken together, it leaves the opposition facing a far steeper path to unseating him than headline polls might suggest. But whichever way this vote goes, leaders throughout the region will be watching closely, especially Andrej Babiš in the Czech Republic and Robert Fico in Slovakia. Martin Poliačik is a former MP and political consultant affiliated with the opposition Progressive Slovakia party.
The biggest threat to Russia is free, independent and democratic Ukraine, because the Russian people would see that this is possible. Very similar pattern is between Slovak pro-Fico people and Orban. The biggest threat for Fico is a pro-European Hungary, because then the Slovaks would see that this is possible, that he's not going to be there forever. I would assume that the new government in Hungary would come up with all the information about corruption and what's been happening since Orban was in power, and Fico would lose his closest ally and also his diplomatic representation towards both Trump and Putin.
Robert Fico has already threatened to continue blocking the EU's €90 billion loan to Ukraine if Viktor Orban is no longer in a position to do so. Martin Poliacek is in fact sceptical that Fico really has what it takes to become the new Orban. He's rather tired, he told me, and also lacks the diplomatic backup that Viktor Orban enjoys.
Babiš si dával už před volbama 2025.
Here in Prague, Jindřich Šidlo, a leading political commentator and satirical journalist at Seznam Zprávy, will be watching the election closely. The conventional wisdom is that a loss for Orban will be a loss for Prime Minister Andrej Babiš and his plans to unpick the stitching of the Czech Republic's liberal democracy. But Jindřich Šidlo says it's a little more nuanced than that.
Myslím, že Andrej Babiš už v tom
I think Andrej Babiš realized during his first term that he can't run the country like Viktor Orban. That's because Orban has been in power much longer, has completely different electoral results, there's no Senate in Hungary, and he was able to effectively write the electoral law to suit himself. Babiš may well aspire to this, but I think he now realistically understands it isn't possible. You can't do that in the Czech Republic. Even changing the electoral law requires agreement. You can't push it through by force. The Senate and the Chamber of Deputies both have to agree, and that doesn't happen easily. So in that sense, he's a much weaker version of Viktor Orban.
Šidlo says that Andrej Babiš is so good at politics that whether Orban wins or loses, he'll spin it to his advantage and will soon establish contact with Petr Magyar if he does indeed emerge victorious. He's a pragmatist. But if Orban does lose, there will be something of a reckoning. A lot of dirty laundry will be aired, and that could have consequences, says András Lederer, head of advocacy at the Hungarian Helsinki Committee.
In the case of the Orban regime, you have an unimaginable amount of financial resources available supporting like-minded regimes. The effect of these resources on assisting like-minded regimes is, I think, unreasonably understudied and explored.
That Hungarian pipeline of support for other illiberal governments could be turned off virtually overnight this weekend. Or perhaps Viktor Orban will defy the polls and win this election, and the flow will be strengthened. There's a lot to play for, and no one's ready to write off Europe's great survivor just yet. For DW, this is Rob Cameron in Prague.
And while a 2-week ceasefire just about holds between the US and Iran, that war is having ripple effects across Europe that might be hard to pause. A reluctance or even refusal by European governments to participate in the US-Israeli-led attacks prompted US President Donald Trump to threaten to exit the NATO military alliance. So is NATO's cohesion in jeopardy? From Brussels, Terry Schultz reports.
Could Donald Trump's attacks on Iran also destroy NATO?
We're very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing.
White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said that Trump would discuss withdrawing from the alliance with NATO chief Mark Rutte on Wednesday, but the two men did not brief reporters after their meeting. The deep divide between the U.S. and Europe over U.S. and Israeli actions against Iran and European governments' reluctance or refusal to allow their airspace and bases for the attacks has created what former U.S. ambassador to NATO Ivo Daalder says is the alliance's worst crisis ever. He says NATO's broken.
The fundamental problem is that the actions that the United States has taken over the past year, from Ukraine and Russia to Greenland to tariffs and now to launching a major war in the Middle East without consultation or even information to its allies, plus the actions that other countries have now taken in part in response to this, has broken the underlying trust between the United States and its Canadian and European allies. And trust is the coin of the realm when it comes to the question of alliances.
Trump has tried to bully fellow NATO members into participating, calling them cowards and saying he'll remember their lack of support. But mostly, he's blamed it on NATO, even though the transatlantic-oriented alliance wouldn't naturally deploy to the Middle East, especially without a mandate from the United Nations. Now Trump's renewed threats he's made in the past to refuse to defend an ally if they're attacked, to stop support of NATO with troops and capabilities, and to pull out of the alliance altogether. There's a law that would require 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to approve that, launched ironically by Secretary of State Marco Rubio back when he was a senator. But many experts believe a president's power would render that law ineffective. And if that happens, says Linas Kojala, director of the Geopolitics and Security Studies Center in Vilnius, his country, Lithuania, would be put in danger.
We cannot allow ourselves to see U.S. withdrawing from NATO. Formally or informally, that would be detrimental to the security of especially the eastern flank countries. We are vulnerable. We cannot lose the U.S. as a member state of NATO.
Ivo Dalder says NATO could survive a U.S. withdrawal, but warns a new European-led version wouldn't come easy or soon.
The good news is you can have a NATO that can function effectively even without the United States. The bad news is it takes money, which I think the Europeans are prepared to take, time, which if U.S. withdraws tomorrow, we won't have, and to some extent U.S. cooperation, because trying to rebuild the bicycle while you're on it is a hard thing to do.
Trump's intentions are impossible to read. One of his latest remarks on NATO membership was that he initially got angry over being denied ownership of Greenland, so he said, bye-bye. Terry Schultz, DW, Brussels.
Terry also did a deep dive into this topic, which you can find on our website, dw.com. A quick reminder of our feedback address, insideeurope@dw.com. I'm Laura Kabelka in Germany. Another ripple effect of the Iran war is reshaping the Caucasus. Armenia, Azerbaijan and Turkey, nations long divided by closed borders and bitter disputes, are showing signs of cooperation, with plans to reopen key trade routes. From Istanbul, Dorian Jones reports on the real promise these proposals hold.
Addressing the European Parliament last month, the Armenian Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, said momentum is building for a new trade route with neighbouring Azerbaijan, driven in part by conflict unfolding across the border in the Middle East. The push follows a US-brokered peace deal last August to reconcile the countries after decades of conflict and reopen key transit routes. Months on, their shared border with Iran is giving both countries a fresh incentive to cooperate, according to Richard Giragosyan, director of the Regional Studies Center, a think tank based in the Armenian capital, Yerevan.
This war in Iran has fostered much more of a localized regional identity, where Armenia, Turkey, Azerbaijan are actually banding together, if you will, in terms of a restoration of regional identity based on self-sufficiency. Now is the one opportunity for consolidating regional connectivity in terms of trade and transport.
For more than 3 decades, the land border between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been closed after ethnic Armenians seized control of the Nagorno-Karabakh region in 1993, which is internationally recognized as Azerbaijani territory. In 2023, Azeri forces regained control of the contested territory. Reconciliation efforts are now accelerating and starting to bear fruits, explains Hikmet Hachiev, Foreign Affairs Advisor to Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev.
We are taking very courageous steps to stimulate regional interaction, cooperation, And we are doing the certain things that can be considered impossible just maybe 6 months ago. Azerbaijani oil products have been delivered to Armenia. We are now currently working of linking Armenia and Azerbaijan electricity grid systems, so that in case of the necessity, Armenia may also import electricity from Azerbaijan.
In March, Turkish Airlines took to the skies connecting Istanbul and Yerevan once more, as part of a broader push to mend ties. Ankara had shuttered its border and cut diplomatic relations in 1994, standing with Azerbaijan. Now, according to Aslı Ayntaşbaş, who leads the Turkey project at the Washington-based think tank, the Brookings Institution, the US-Israeli war with Iran is fueling Turkey's ambitions to expand its regional sway and giving Europe a fresh chance to look beyond the Middle East for its oil supplies.
If you look at the map of Turkey, the importance of the South Caucasus region becomes very obvious from a map. As a new Silk Road, I think Turkey can open its border with Armenia and think of an alternative route, an alternative geopolitical opening from Europe all the way into Central Asia.
As Europe looks to reduce its reliance on Middle Eastern fossil fuels amid soaring fuel prices, attention is turning to Central Asia's vast oil and gas reserves, says Tatiana Metrova, a research fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at New York's Columbia University. But, Metrova warns, serious obstacles remain given the huge investment that will be required to build new pipelines.
I totally believe that there will be a lot of discussions about Middle Corridor and a lot of rhetorics, both in the region and in Europe. But frankly, I do not believe that it will materialize in any significant scale. It's becoming more of a great pretext for international affairs rather than a real, clear, attractive business case. The cost of transportation is very high, too many risks and too low margins.
The Caucasus, caught between the fires of Russia's war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East, is facing real uncertainty over the feasibility of any new fossil-based energy corridor to Europe. Doubts linger over the economic and environmental rationale for investing billions of euros into fossil fuels, just as Europe moves towards phasing them out, as top scientists warn that the continued reliance on coal, oil and gas drives catastrophic climate change. Still, Farid Shafiev, chairman of the Baku-based Center for Analysis of International Relations, says he believes this could be a path to greater regional stability.
The problem with the Brussels policy, they don't want to invest in hydrocarbon, they don't invest in gas, but in Armenia and Azerbaijan, after 30 years of conflict, that this is the opportunity for both countries. In the south, in the north, it's the wars and destruction, so we need to find the way for operations. People are exhausted, and there is indeed sort of the window of opportunities to bring this alternative route.
Cooperation could also be vital in resisting feared future threats from a Russia seeking to reassert itself in the region. However, it could be such Russian threats to the region's stability that ultimately prove too great an obstacle for any large-scale infrastructure investments by Europe. Dorian Jones, DW, Istanbul.
This is Inside Europe, and I'm Laura Kabelka in Berlin. Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio program from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Laura Kabelka in Berlin. And believe me when I say you're in for a treat, because Inside Europe's sister podcast, Living Planet, is taking over with an environment special on protein. Maybe you know somebody, or are somebody, who's obsessed with eating lots of it. Well, you're not alone. Diet culture went from hyping low-fat products to worshipping protein as if it were the holy grail of nutrition. This protein craze is not only reshaping our diets, but also our planet. And with all the myths and half-truths about protein intake flying around, Living Planet's Jennifer Collins set out to explore what we truly need for good health and which choices could lower emissions without compromising our strength. You will hear from a powerlifter's surprising shift from meat lover to vegan butcher against the backdrop of online culture wars, narrated by our colleague Neil King from DW's Environment Department. Enjoy.
Everything of the Sauerbraten is connected with my grandmother, I think. I can't put it apart with the emotions.
One of Nils Steiger's core childhood memories is his grandmother making him Sauerbraten. It's a traditional German dish, basically a pot roast made with beef, marinated in vinegar and spices. And the name literally translates as sour roast because of its tangy taste.
Like, my grandmother always asked me when I visited her, what do you want to eat? And there was never a moment I didn't say Sauerbraten. So, like, I just ate it every single time I went there.
After all those years of his grandmother lovingly making him Sauerbraten, Nils, who runs a gym, recently decided to return the favour when she visited him in Dresden, a city in East Germany known for its restored Baroque buildings.
And I did the Sauerbraten, and she said, "Oh, is it really not meat?" And my wife was sitting on the table, and we just smiled at each other and was like, yeah, that's cool.
But why was fitness-mad Nils Steiger, a man who says he once
ate like a ton of meat, like too much meat at all?
Why was he cooking a vegan Sauerbraten for his definitely not vegan grandmother? And why did his shift from powerlifting meat maniac to gym-going vegan butcher bother certain people so much that they sent death threats? I'm Neil King, and this week on Living Planet we're talking protein and all the strange places it's suddenly turning up. If you've been to a grocery store or even glanced at the internet lately, you've probably noticed something weird. Protein is everywhere. Cottage cheese that used to brag about being low-fat now screams high in protein. Entire store aisles are now devoted to high-protein products and supplements galore. And it seems we are not getting enough of the stuff either.
Here are 5 signs you're not getting enough protein in your diet.
I can't hit my protein! Here are 5 signs that you are low in protein. Number 1, your hair falls...
Or we're getting it from the wrong source.
Plant-based proteins simply don't work as well as animal protein.
But there will never be a vegan protein source that surpasses that of an animal one.
So today we're breaking down the protein boom. And to understand how we got here, we're starting with someone who grew up inside this protein-obsessed culture, Nils Steiger, and how his personal journey mirrors a global shift.
I started when I was 14, because it was the earliest possible age I could go to the gym. I think it was the time the sports industry started, like with all the social media and stuff, like 2012. So there was like the first hype of gyms and health.
Okay, quick time travel back to the early 2010s. That dim, distant era before there was a gym on every corner and before every second video on social media was someone shouting about gains. Facebook ruled the world back then. Instagram had just been born and both were mostly places for badly filtered photos. Around that time, gym culture really took off, helped along by a whole new wave of impossibly toned fitness influencers online. So Niels gets sucked into the gym scene. He's in school, and he has a lot of time to go lift weights every day. But he's also competitive.
So I thought for myself, okay, I'm doing it just for me, but how can I do something where I can measure myself with others?
He gets into competitive powerlifting. And if you've never seen powerlifting before, it's pretty straightforward and pretty intense. Athletes do 3 lifts: the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. The whole goal is to move as much weight as humanly possible in each one. And Niels loves it.
But also, when you do it competitive, there's a pressure, I guess, like to the point where you are very, so much under pressure when you don't get stronger every month and month. And because the stronger you are, the slower the progression gets.
And the key to building muscle and getting strong when working out, you guessed it, eating tons of protein. Niels is eating about 200 grams of protein a day at this point in his competitive career. That's about 7 ounces for our US listeners. And where is all that protein coming from? Not tofu or plants.
If you don't supplement, it's basically meat. Say like 300 to 500 grams every day. Like bare minimum. Yeah, like quite a lot. Just like typical gym diet, like pasta or rice and some vegetables and whatever meat you come by, but mostly chicken.
500 grams of meat is about 3 average-sized chicken fillets a day. Niels eats like this for about 10 years.
Because like the bubble, like the fitness and sports bubble, and is so close to that, and they have like their, I would say, own belief system. Like you need to eat meat to get muscles, you need to eat a lot of meat to be strong and everything around that. And of course, when you are young, you believe in that.
But then, when Niels was about 24, came a moment that changed everything. He witnessed something he simply couldn't look away from, and it reshaped his relationship with food and his career. But we'll come back to the moment that changed Niels' life later in the episode, because now we're going to take a closer look at the protein craze. Protein is big business right now. We're talking a global, growing, multi-billion-dollar market. And it's reshaping our food system and the way we eat. One survey found around 44% of US consumers and over half of Gen Z and millennials are actively trying to crank up their protein intake. For most Americans, that means more meat and dairy, while whey, once a waste product of cheesemaking, has become the go-to protein supplement. Our obsession with protein has deeper roots than you might think. In the mid-1800s, German scientist Justus von Liebig claimed protein was the fuel for muscle energy, and even flogged a supposedly high-protein syrupy beef extract. Fast forward to the early 1900s, and US dietary guidelines were saying working men needed about 110 grams a day. By the mid-20th century, some were concerned that many people, especially in low-income regions, weren't getting enough of the essential growth nutrient. So that sparked a lot of research, says Bettina Mittendorfer, a health professor of medicine and nutrition and exercise physiology at the University of Missouri.
The research focused a lot on the beneficial effects of protein, primarily because when the field got really interested in it, I think like 50, 60 years ago or so, we didn't have the same nutritional status that we have now.
The protein supplement industry took off around this time, though it mostly stayed in bodybuilding circles. But the big shift came with social media. Open TikTok or Instagram now and you're flooded with messages telling you to eat more protein, to get lean, get ripped, or just stay healthy.
How much protein should you eat per day to maximize muscle growth?
If you're trying to build a mass physique and get big muscles in the gym, you have to be eating a high-protein diet. It's not as hard as...
If you're trying to build muscle, these high-protein, delicious cheeseburger Hot Pockets make the perfect grab-and-go snack.
I personally think it's a food fad, right? We've gone through these phases, right, where fat was the evil. then the carbs were the evil. It leaves very little, so it's like the next thing. Then what should you eat? If you can't eat fat, if you can't eat carbs, you need to eat protein.
Our craving for animal protein, beef, dairy and whey, comes with a big climate price. Apart from being a major contributor to the emissions driving climate change, livestock farming fuels deforestation and wipes out habitats. Raising cows, sheep and pigs also gobbles up far more land and water than growing plant proteins like beans and lentils. Plant proteins need a relatively small patch of land, under 10 square meters per kilo of protein. But beef from pasture-raised cows can take up over 2,000 square meters per kilo, according to one study. The Eat Lancet Commission, a group of leading researchers, recommends a switch to what it calls the planetary health diet. It's a mostly plant-based flexitarian approach that boosts whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts and legumes, while sharply cutting red meat and sugar. The potential climate payoff is big, say the scientists. If widely adopted, the diet could cut global agricultural emissions of non-CO2 greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide by about 15% by 2050. But the diet was attacked online by carnivore diet influencers like pro-meat doctor Sean Baker. Some claimed Eat Lancet wants to force everyone to become vegan, even though it actually recommends a flexitarian diet, and that a switch to the diet will harm people's health.
Currently, I am public enemy number one. Now, this is based upon the people that basically want us to eat bugs and soybean gruel for the rest of our lives. This is, the folks that are involved in what's called the Eat Lancet Commission.
But do the assertions about the superiority of animal protein in staying fit and healthy really bear out? We ask protein expert Bettina Mittendorfer to check some of the claims. Bettina's work zeroes in on how protein actually functions in the body. So when she's asked that classic sound level check question from radio hosts and podcasters, what did you have for breakfast? Her answer might seem a little unexpected.
Oh, today actually I had cinnamon raisin toast.
No obvious protein there, right?
I had a cappuccino. There's protein in there. And it's actually the bread, cinnamon raisin bread does have protein too. Just it's not a obvious protein source.
And that's one of the misconceptions about protein. Almost everything we eat contains at least some. It's just that some foods pack much more of it than others. And quick flashback to school biology before we bust any myths. Protein isn't optional. It's essential, because it delivers the amino acids our bodies need to build and repair, well, us.
This is critical because essential amino acids, like essential vitamins, are those that the body cannot make themselves. So we entirely rely on our nutrition intake to get those.
When kids, for instance, don't get enough of certain amino acids, their growth can stall. That's how fundamental protein is. All of our lean body mass depends on it. Our organs, our muscles, even the cells that power our immune system, they're all built from protein.
Absolutely. There's a certain amount that we need to consume in the diet to make sure that we have a normal functioning body and body size.
This brings us to claim number 1. Most people are getting too little protein.
There's just no sign or data really to support that the majority of the population has insufficient protein intake. It just isn't right, I think. And that, I think, is at the core of the whole craze.
The average lean person needs around 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day to maintain healthy functioning. For a person weighing 68 kilograms, or about 150 pounds, that's about 54 grams of protein, which is about 8 large eggs.
This is sufficient for 97.5% of the population. So this estimate has a little bit of a cushion already. The real true mean requirement for the average would be lower than that, 0.6 grams per kg per day. But that is, of course, there's inter-individual variability. There are people who need more during certain conditions.
But if 8 eggs sounds like a lot to you, does to me, most of us in the West are actually overdoing it on food in general, Bettina says. We're already getting plenty of protein, usually around 1.1 grams per kilo of body weight, without even trying. Now, of course, there are a few caveats. If your diet is basically sugary drinks and beige food, you might need a supplement. And some studies indicate a percentage of older adults may not be getting enough protein either. And then, if you're active, exercising a lot in the gym and trying to build muscle, adding more protein will help aid that, as well as tissue repair. Everyone is a bit different, but evidence suggests aiming for around 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day is generally enough here. How much protein you eat and when depends on your goals.
Well, are you exercising to maintain health, or are you exercising for physical performance? The same thing is like if you want to maximize your muscle mass and strength, what you do in the gym and what you eat is going to be different, and it's exactly that nuance, right?
Just to recap, the claim that most of us are protein deficient has been well and truly busted. That brings us to claim number 2. More protein means more muscle. That's not entirely wrong, but again, there are some nuances.
I think this is where the protein craze came from a lot too, is focusing really on those studies that show, amino acids are essential for building muscle. And that's true, and it's true for a certain amount. It's a dose response within a normal physiological range. But
studies show at a certain point piling on more protein just doesn't do you any favors. When conducting small human trials and mouse experiments, Bettina's team found that once protein creeps above about 22% of your daily calories, things can start heading in the wrong direction. We're talking a higher risk of atherosclerosis, basically the arteries hardening and narrowing, which is a major risk factor for heart attacks and strokes. There's also evidence that too much is linked to type 2 diabetes. Bettina says more research is definitely needed on optimal amounts of protein for building muscle and on what is too much. But now on to claim number 3. Eating a lot of protein makes you fuller, so helps with weight loss.
Longer-term studies don't support that either. Part of it is compliance, of course, too, and that's what I mentioned before.
Short-term studies find that protein can make you feel fuller. But when you look at long-term research, that effect doesn't reliably lead to eating less or losing more weight. Partly because high-protein diets are hard to stick with, Bettina says some of the nuances are lost. When you cut calories to lose weight, you actually need a higher percentage of protein just to maintain basic nutritional needs. Not because protein speeds weight loss necessarily, but because eating less food can push you into protein deficiency if you're not careful. It's easier to cut out non-essential fats without risking nutrition.
And then it's very easy to convey the message too, right? That protein is lean. It's like the lean meat, and we all strive to be lean. And so it's a little faulty, the thinking, of course, right?
And now to the 4th and final claim. Animal protein beats plant protein.
You don't really need to eat animal proteins, but you have to make sure that you have a good balance and a variety in your diet, right? And this is very well known, oftentimes where corn and beans are a classic sort of combination in some societies that eat it, because together they provide the right portfolio of amino acids, or, one provides what the other one doesn't have a whole lot in.
Really, it's the variety that's important, because some plant proteins are missing small amounts of key amino acids. Mixing foods like beans and grains over the course of the day ensures your body gets the full set it needs to build protein. While more research is needed, studies show no major difference between an omnivore diet and a vegan diet when it comes to building muscle or gaining strength. Your body just breaks protein down into amino acids and rebuilds what it needs. It doesn't matter whether it came from a cow or a bean. Okay, so what should we be eating then? Back to Bettina.
Mediterranean type diet or so, right? Plants, heavy on plants and everything. It doesn't have to be that extra piece of chicken, right? Like again, the classic sort of deck of cart size meat type protein or so is sufficient.
The Mediterranean diet focuses on plants, keeps red and processed meats to a minimum, and includes fish and poultry in moderation. And in many ways, it mirrors the Eat Lancet planetary health diet, a way of eating that researchers say supports both human health and the health of the planet. But for Niels Steiger, back in his competitive powerlifting days, that kind of plant-forward eating wasn't even on his radar. He was convinced that real strength came from consuming meat.
You do it because whatever it takes, and then you don't ask like, is it right or wrong? Everyone does it. You do it as well, and then just when you ask the right questions, then you open your eyes and are like, oh, there's another way. You just it's not this way. There are like a lot of ways.
His turning point came out of nowhere. The day his wife put on a documentary.
A system of rotating cages lowers the fully conscious pigs 2 or 3 at a time into the heavily concentrated gas.
It was about animal agriculture and factory farming. He was shocked by what he saw.
I think we ignore the fact how animals are treated when we go to the supermarket. We just see the products and don't visualize what is happening behind every product, and just seeing the images in slaughterhouses and animal agriculture and everything around that, and I couldn't see it. So I became vegan, and that's 6 years ago.
Having been such an avid meat eater, his switch to veganism caused
mostly confusion. So why are you doing it, and then when do you quit it again? So people thought it's just a 1, 2, 3 month thing, and then I'll quit again.
And one guy from his gym community, well, let's just say he took it personally.
Yeah, it's like just the reaction of, now you eat less meat, so I'll go eat more meat. And for every tofu you eat, I'm going to eat one more steak, and like the typical going full force into the other direction.
Niels had to relearn almost everything about how he shopped and cooked. You'll hear where this new way of cooking unexpectedly led Niels in just a moment. And we're back with Niels, who was just talking about going vegan.
So at first, to be brutally honest, I just had a lot of supplements just to get the protein in, and like a lot of protein shakes and a lot of protein bars and everything. And then I started thinking about, okay, what can I eat actually? It made going shopping much more easier, because you just basically ignore 80% of every supermarket. You don't need to look at everything anymore. And then you concentrate on things you can eat and relearn cooking, I think. Like, what can I mix with each other? And like never before I looked so much into new recipes and everything. So it was quite a fun way, and a thing.
And even though he no longer eats it, he still misses the taste of meat, especially his grandmother's Sauerbraten. Trying to recreate it without animal products ended up setting him on an entirely new path to launching a vegan butcher shop and food company.
So at first, it just should be a hobby. At the beginning, I never thought about having like the business the size we have right now. I just wanted to make products and produce products I myself like to eat. And I tend to like the traditional kind of tastes.
The Friends Not Food office and production kitchen sit tucked behind an ordinary residential building in Dresden. It's just before Christmas, a busy time for the company as orders roll in for Sauerbraten, vegan cheeses and traditional German festive treats like Stollen, a kind of sweet bread.
So we need to go through a cellar. It's a little labyrinth here.
Inside the busy kitchen in the building's cellar, the team is turning soy, pea and gluten proteins into sausages, burgers, Leberkäse, Döner meat, goulash, gravies, all the comfort foods he grew up with. The products are sold online and stocked in 7 vegane Fleischereien, vegan butcher shops across Germany. The first opened in Dresden in 2023. Niels says he wasn't expecting it to grow so quickly.
Yeah, the scale of it was surprising, and also the feedback was very surprising. Like it felt like people were just waiting on it. So yeah, it was the right time and the right place.
The warm reception mirrors a bigger food trend. Plant-based products and protein powders have been booming over the past few years. But not everyone welcomed Niels's vegan butcher idea with open arms.
So, of course, in the beginning, people were like, why do they name themselves vegan, as a vegane Fleischerei, which means like vegan butcher? Why can't they name themselves like the vegetable store?
The shops look like traditional butcheries. Tiled walls, a deli-style counter of various vegan meats and cheeses, and that alone triggered some strong reactions.
I mean, we had like everything from people wishing us dead, and we're like, we're gonna attack your store, and like it was like quite a big dimension in it. But of course, nothing happened. But yeah.
And with time, the backlash faded. Niels thinks it was less about the food and more about what veganism represents in today's culture wars.
Veganism often is a synonym of leftist and woke and all the other things people are fighting with. And then they feel attacked and try to defend, even though there's no reason for defense. But yeah, essentially, like, I don't know if anybody is really or has such a hard time with broccoli steak, but they more feel attacked in their belief system. So that's why their reaction is such a harsh one, I think.
The fight over vegan food labels has gone all the way to Brussels. European Union lawmakers voted to ban words like burger and steak for plant-based versions, saying they're confusing shoppers. Niels says if that does eventually become law, his business will have to adapt. But in the meantime, he's even convinced his steak-loving gym friend to try some vegan meats.
He's saying like, it's not that bad and it's not, you can eat it. If I would die, I would eat it. So it's a little change.
Trust me, for a German, that is glowing praise. Niels still trains 6 days a week, every morning like clockwork, except on Sundays. And he gets about 150 grams of plant-based protein a day. Turns out he really loves tofu.
Like, since I started being vegan, I realized I don't even need meat. Like, still I'm strong, still I have a lot of muscles, and I don't need to eat it.
And while he doesn't expect everyone to go vegan, he hopes he can nudge people toward eating more plants.
It just comes down to being open-minded, I guess. And I feel taste is something we could all agree on. If something tastes good, tastes good. Like, you can't argue with that. If you take a bite, there's a great texture and a great taste, why wouldn't you eat it?
And that's it for today. This high-in-protein story was produced by Jennifer Collins and edited and voiced by Neil King. It first aired on Living Planet, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts, and of course on dw.com. If you don't want the conversation to end here, you can drop us a line at insideeurope@dw.com, or you can leave us a voice note at speakpipe.com/insideeurope. This program was produced by Emma Meyer and me, Laura Kabelka. Our sound engineers were Michael Springer and Ilias Katsamakas. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn and Berlin.